Alrighty, Keston. So, like we were talking about today during our lesson, wanted to compare your swing real quick to Bryce Harper's swing since I know you talked about that you emulate a lot of your swing or base your swing a lot on Bryce Harper's swing. So, what I want to do is play y'all's side by side. And then from there, we're going to talk about the differences and kind of go into what are the next couple steps and what we can expect going forward of what we'll work on. Okay, so first of all, Keston, for your age, you have a very, very great swing. Not a lot of kids at your age have a sound swing. So that's very first thing. That's a great sign, okay? One thing that we want to talk about, right? The big two things that we'll talk about, that we talked about in our lesson is number one, how we step to the target, right? If we take a look at Bryce Harper real quick, right? If we take a look with Harper, goes up, and then directly gets to his target, right? His very first movement is towards the target, right? To where he's trying to get himself into a really great stance right here, right? If you take a look at Harper in his lower half, he gets into what I like to call the capital A, okay? A lot of really great hitters get into this nice A position. Now, the big thing about this A is we want that A to be, let me actually get it on this screen. We want that A to be symmetrical. What we don't want to do is have a very long A and a short A or a very tall A, right? Because thinking about power, what we want to do is make sure that we have a really solid foundation in base when we swing. Harper has probably one of the best foundations in baseball for his swing, which causes him, like we talked about today, to be extremely explosive, right? So what we worked on today was one of the things, as you notice here, if I were to draw a line, you really, really like to ride the chalk lines of the batter's box, which isn't a bad thing. There's a lot of players that do that. But one thing to keep in mind, especially as a pitcher, and coming from a pitching background, the older and older that you get, a lot more players are going to be going more in at you, right? Now, the great thing, it's kind of a double-edged sword if you think about it. The double edge of the sword is you're able to get a lot of reach on the outside parts of the plate, which takes away that aspect for a pitcher. But that introduces the aspect of the inside part of the plate, which, like we talked about today, is a reactionary pitch. It brings out that fight or flight reaction in our body, right? So what you're either going to do is you're going to get out of the way of it, or you're just going to swing at it, right? That's why a lot of pitchers, especially older pitchers, pro pitchers, college pitchers, high school pitchers, they love to go inside, right? So one thing that we talked about today was giving yourself just a little bit more space, right? And the reason for that is just that, number one, instead of stepping out, you are forced to step towards our target, right? Because if we are off the plate a little bit more, instead maybe right here, if you step out, what we're going to do is we're going to make a swing and we're going to miss the ball as we're coming around, right? Or we're going to end cap it, right? So instead, what we're causing ourselves to do is go at our target in order to stay on plane, right? Now, one thing about your swing, Keston, that I really, really like is that for a lot of kids your age, what they will want to do is they'll want to drop in what I like to call the Nike swoosh swing, where the first reaction is to drop and then come up, right? Versus, if we take a look at your swing plane versus Bryce Harper's, very, very similar. You load into your hands, and from there, you're moving through the baseball and on a good plane right here, right? So that's a really, really good sign, right? One thing that we did talk about, and I want to continue to work on, is the hips right here, right? Especially for your age, Keston, you have really, really good fluid hips. I've only dealt with one other athlete at your age that has such fluid hips, and that's why I was talking about today of really being explosive and working with those hips, right? So if you notice with Harper, right, if I were to pause at connection with the baseball, we notice his hips are still closed off, right? Meaning for Bryce Harper in this case, we are looking towards, for him, if he was a righty, it would be right center field, right? So if we notice upon contact for you, Keston, before we're even there, we have opened our hips right here, right? And if we think about energy, if we think about the rubber band theory that we talked about earlier with potential energy and kinetic energy, right? We have built up all this potential energy right here, and potential energy has already been made, right? So the reason that I say this, Keston, is because you have, number one, for your size, and number two, for your age, you have a lot of power and a very fluid swing. So what I want to make sure is that we don't throw a lot of that power before we get to the ball, right? As we notice with Harper, closed off hips, through the baseball, right? And even so, if you notice, he keeps his hips closed, right? Same thing, whole way. If you notice with his swing, he is still towards right center field. Versus with ours, we're looking towards left field, right? So that's another thing to kind of keep in mind whenever we're swinging. Outside of that, I love your hands going through the baseball. I think you have a really great swing plane, really good hips, really good bottom half. The big two things for you, Keston, are going to be working with your hips to make sure that we don't fly them open and fly your shoulders open, or the second, that we continue to go towards our target. Outside of those two things, which we'll continue to work on as we work together in the future, I think you have a really good swing. I'm really excited to continue to work with you. And feel free to let me know if you have any questions, man. Outside of that, great job today, Keston.